Mark chapter 5. Yesterday, when we were doing Mark chapter 4, we left off with Jesus in the boat in the Sea of Galilee. Actually, there were several boats, the Bible tells us. And Jesus was in one, and the disciples were in the boat with him, and the storm came up, and Jesus was asleep in the stern of the boat, and the disciples woke him up and said, "Aren't you concerned that we're about to die?" And he got up, and you know what he did. He stilled the storm and calmed the sea. We pick up in chapter 5 of them arriving on the other side of the sea from that same trip. In verse 1, "And they came to the other side of the sea into the country of the Gerasenes." Now, when you get to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, it's no longer a Jewish region, or it wasn't during the Bible times. We know it now as the Transjordan. Jordan, the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, is on the other side of the Jordan River and on the other side of the sea. And this is the area where Jesus and his crew arrived. It was their intended destination. But it's a Greek area. It's an area known as Decapolis. Deca, 10, and polis, cities. So 10 cities, the area of 10 cities. There are more than 10 cities, but there are 10 large Greek cities there. And this area was settled by Alexander the Great's generals, or one of his generals. After Alexander died, his generals kind of divided up the conquered territory, and this became a Hellenized area called Decapolis on the other side of the Jordan River from Judea. So this is where they arrived. So what's the deal with, what's the difference between the Jews and the Greeks religiously? The Jews are monotheistic, and the Greeks are pantheistic, right? They are not God followers, Yahweh followers. They are Jupiter followers. Well, not Jupiter, Zeus followers, and all the other pantheon of gods that are in the Greek tradition. So there's conflict between Jews and Greeks for that reason. So when they arrive there, you know, they're in a foreign world. So they've arrived, they've come to the country of the Gerasenes. Let me just elaborate on the word Gerasene real quick. Gerasene, there are several cities along the coast there where it sounded the same. Gerasa, Garadine, I don't know, something like that. So we don't know exactly where the Gerasa area is that he landed in. Don't know the exact spot for sure. But it's a kind of an overlapping of an area. So it's a place in Decapolis where he landed, the country of the Gerasenes. All right, that's where he is. Let's pick up in verse 2. "And when they had come out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. And he had his dwelling among the tombs." Let's stop right there for a second. First of all, Mark uses immediately a lot, and that's the pet word of the book of Mark. Immediately. But when we talk about a man from the tombs, he wasn't from the tombs. He was living in the tombs. He was from the nearby area. But he was, well, let's just go on. "And no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain, because he'd often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him." So this is a wild man. You know, he didn't grow up in the tombs, but he's living in the tombs or among the tombs. And people have been sent down, you know, the sheriff's department has been sent down there to try to get him to be quiet. And they've tied him up, and they've chained him up, and they've shackled him, and no one can wrestle with him, and he's just too strong. So this is who he is. Verse 5, "Constantly, night and day, among the tombs and in the mountains, he was crying out and gnashing himself with stones." What a nuisance to have to be around. What a poor man, of course, but man, if you wouldn't dare go down that road, would you? You'd tell your kids, "Don't go there, don't go down there." So, "And seeing Jesus," verse 6, "from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, 'What do I have to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me.' For Jesus had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And he was asking him, "What is your name?" And he said to him, "My name is Legion, for we are many." So this person ran up to Jesus, and what's the first thing he did? He bowed down before him. Remember, he's Greek. He's not Jewish. He doesn't know anything about the Messiah. He's never read Torah. He's never been to Jewish synagogue. He doesn't know anything about traditions of the Jews. But he ran up to Jesus and bowed down before him and said, "I'm identifying you as Jesus, and then secondly, Son of the Most High God." I don't know if you just saw that, but a whole bunch of fireworks were going off behind me for a second. So he identified Jesus by name and by office. And then he said, "I implore you by God," a monotheistic God, "do not torment me." Why would Jesus torment anybody? Not the man talking, is it? It's the things that's inside the man talking. Why did he talk this way to Jesus? Because Jesus had been saying, he didn't say it just once, he had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And he had been asking him, "What is your name? What's your name? Come out of him. What's your name? Come out of him." And he said, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he began to entreat him earnestly not to send them out of the country. What country are they in? Country of the Gerasenes, the polytheistic or pantheistic world. Now, there was a big herd of swine feeding there on the mountain. That's another reason you know this is not Judea, because swine were an unclean animal. So they're certainly not going to have herds of swine in the Jewish nation. It's a big herd of swine feeding there on the mountain, and the demons, plural, entreated him, saying, "Send us into the swine, so that we may enter them." And he gave them permission. Why did they want to be sent into the swine? They were afraid that he was going to send them into early punishment, early torment. There's a whole school of thought in demonology about the condemnation of these spirits, who these spirits are, where they came from, and what their fate is. We won't go into it right now, but it's a very interesting thing to do, and perhaps we'll go into it later. And coming out, the unclean spirits entered into the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, about 2,000 of them, and they were drowned in the sea. Now, I have read that because people didn't know what was at the bottom of the sea, that they thought in the mindset of the day that the sea might be a doorway into the abyss, like the underworld, the Hadean realm, the realm of the dead. Not just this sea, but any sea. And so when the demons asked Jesus, "Please don't torment us. Are you here to torment us before the time?" I think it says in Matthew, they asked Jesus to be put into the swine, and the swine, the first thing they did was run into the abyss. So there may be some poetic justice there. Verse 14, "And their herdsmen ran away and reported it in the city and out in the country." They were loudmouths. "And the people came to see what it was that happened. And they came to see Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed. And he was sitting down, and he was clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion. And they became frightened. And those who had seen it described to them how it had happened to the demon-possessed man, and all about the swine. And they began to entreat him, 'Depart from the region. We don't know, we don't understand, you don't understand this, so it's time for you to leave, buddy.' And so Jesus, of course, complied. And then in verse 18, as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed was entreating him that he might come with him, might accompany him. And Jesus did not let him, but he said to him, 'Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he had mercy on you.' And do you think the fellow did it? Well, the Bible tells us that he did. So Jesus actually commissioned this man who was full of demons as the first missionary. Isn't that cool? And a missionary in a foreign field, in a Greek culture, a Hellenized culture. Verse 20, and he did. He went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. Look back in verse 19 where he says, go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you. Jesus is speaking of himself there. That is the word that is translated as master. It's not Yahweh. And then we have in verse 20 what great things Jesus had done for him. So Jesus actually did this for him. And everyone marveled. Verse 21. And where they come about to the other side again, when Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, back in Judea, of course a great multitude gathered about him. Why? Because they were watching him through their binoculars. Right? What's he doing? Is he coming back? I really need some help. So they were waiting for him when he got there. A great multitude gathered about him. And he stayed by the seashore. And one of the synagogue officials, this man's name was Jairus, came up. Now remember, a synagogue is the Jewish worship place, and he's a Jewish official in the synagogue. He came up, and upon seeing him, he fell at his feet. He's desperate, and entreated him earnestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her, that she may get well and live. Two things. And Jesus went off with him. And a great multitude was following him and pressing in on him. This is Jesus' life. Once he became messianic and began to demonstrate his messiahship, man, he was mobbed everywhere he went. And one of these people, and we're going to see it in verse 25, and I kind of talked about this just a little bit in chapter 4, was a woman who had a hemorrhage, and she'd had it for 12 years, probably vaginal bleeding, and she'd had it for 12 years. Could you imagine? Could you imagine that? And in the Jewish world, would that make you unclean? I think so. And so her life was not doing well. And she had endured, in verse 26, she had endured much at the hands of many physicians, and had spent all she had, and she wasn't helped at all, but rather had grown worse. After hearing about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she thought, oh, if I can just touch his garments, I'll get well. And immediately, there it is again, immediately the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. And immediately Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, okay, you see the crowd, the whole multitude pressing in on you, and you're going to tell us who touched your garments? And he looked around to see the woman who had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Let's talk about this for a second. I think this is extremely fascinating. We say that Jesus healed her, but Jesus didn't heal her. Her own faith healed her. The power proceeded from Jesus. He didn't have anything to do with it. He felt it leave his body, and he turned around to identify the person who had caused this. Your faith has made you well. Remember yesterday, if you haven't seen the previous chapters, go back and watch them. Shameless commercial for myself. But we talked a bit about belief yesterday in Mark chapter 4. You must believe in order for the power of God to flow. Belief is extremely important. It's essential. It's beyond extremely important. It's an absolute must. You must have it. And she did. She believed that if she came up behind him in the crowd and touched the hem of his garment, she would be healed. You need to believe too. Okay, let's move forward. While he was still speaking, in verse 35, they came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, your teacher has died. Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher anymore? messengers came from the house. They were on their way to Jairus' house. The daughter died. And they sent messengers to say, don't trouble the teacher anymore. But Jesus, overhearing what was being spoken, said to the synagogue official, don't be afraid. Just believe. There's the word. Believe. And he allowed no one to follow with him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the synagogue official. And Jesus beheld a commotion, and people loudly weeping and wailing. Why do you think they were doing that? Because the little girl had died? Yes, but there were also official funerary wailers that were brought out by the wealthy as part of the culture. So these may be funerary weepers or wailers. So Jesus observed these people and said, why are these people here? He said, why make a commotion and weep? In verse 39, the child has not died. She's only asleep. And they began laughing at him. But putting them all out, he took along the child's father and mother, and his own companions. So that was Peter, James, and John. Father, mother, Peter, James, and John. Okay, that's 5. Why these 5 only? And entered the room where the child was. Why these 5 only? Because remember, there must be belief. Peter, James, and John believed because they had seen what Jesus can do and the power of belief and faith. But the father and mother believed because they had come. She had sent him, I'm sure, and he had come. And so we have 5 believers in the room. What happens when you have believers and you ask for power? It comes. Taking the child by the hand, he said to her, Talitha, which is Aramaic, which is the language Jesus spoke, and which translated means little girl, rise. And immediately the girl rose and began to walk, for she was 12 years old. And she could walk, basically. For she was 12 years old, and immediately they were completely astounded. And he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this. And he said that something should be given her to eat. That's the end of chapter 5. Hope you're enjoying this lesson. See you again soon with chapter 6. Have a great day. Bye.